Today's message is titled Restoration for the Exiled. So today's parashah, Shalach, which means sent, talks and discusses about the spies, right, that spied out the land. There's various portions within the parashah. So the spies that spy out the land, then it goes into a man who breaks the laws of Shabbat, and as a result receives a penalty of death. Then it goes into the fringes, or the tzitzit, and the commandments that are given to us on the through the tzitzit. The story of the spies that spied out the land. It's interesting. As I was thinking through the message, it's really these people, Joshua and Caleb and these others that went into the land to spy it out to see if it was a good place to live. They had this opportunity to decide whether or not they, through the power of God, could conquer and take this land that God said he would give them. And you start thinking about it, and you think to yourself, well, they weren't in exile yet, these people. So this is like pre-exile period, because God is just kind of establishing them. But we think of 40 years in the wilderness, and we think that these people were in exile. They really weren't in exile. God was taking care of them. And we're going to talk a little bit what exile means later on in the teaching, but exile really means being banished from your natural origin. So at this point in time, they weren't banished, they weren't lost, they weren't taken away from their natural origin, but God was preparing them. He was taking them to a place, and he was sending people to go and see what exactly they were going to receive. Now, some of them came back, and there was a generational gap that had to go away. So there was a whole generation that said, we can't do this. And, a lot of it was going to be hard. It was going to be very difficult. It was going to be a hard task to go into this land, right, and develop it. It wasn't like it was perfect. They didn't go in, and it wasn't as if they had the opportunity to just go in and take over homes and it was a turnkey land. I mean, they have to go in there, and they'd have to farm, and they'd have to work the land, and they'd have to build it for their families and their children and their generations. So some of them were thinking, man, this is going to be very difficult. Remember, they came out of Egypt, where they had everything. They probably had restaurants, and imagine us who weren't raised on farms. Someone all of a sudden tells you you have to go. The only way you can eat is if you farm, right? I mean, what are you talking about? I'm not going to go farm. I want to go to the restaurant down the street. No, restaurants don't exist anymore. You have to hunt for your food. What? I'm not going to hunt for my food. You mean I have to gut a deer and pull out its organs? No way. It's a different society now. So they're going into this society. It's very difficult for them. They don't want to work it. So this is pre-exile. I mean, it's pre the period of time that God banishes them. So he's establishing them. He's giving them the laws. And he's saying, if you do these things, I will make you prosper. I will make you fruitful. And as I'm reading through it, he gives them commands. As I'm reading through the parashah, I kind of skip over the spies, because the spies we've heard a million times. I come to this guy who goes out on the Shabbats, and he picks up and he gathers these sticks. And he's gathering sticks which, according to the law, is a sin, punishable by death. I think to myself, geez, all the guy was doing was gathering sticks. It was deeper than just gathering sticks. It was the purpose of why he was gathering those sticks. So the thrust of the gathering of the sticks was to be made to sacrifice, or some believe it was used to sacrifice to an idol or whatever it may be. But the point was that he was breaking the law by gathering sticks. And so I have a story here that when I was doing my readings, I read that I think is going to help stage the discussion around the exiled. Because I want everyone to realize that Israel are the children of God. Jewish people are the children of God. The Christian church today really sees itself as a replacement of the Jewish people. And I want everyone to understand that's a fundamental flaw in the theology of Christianity today. And I want to discuss today about those who are exiled. To be exiled does not mean that you are no longer loved. To be exiled does not mean that you are no longer in covenant. To be exiled means that you are not in your natural state. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. And I think that the story of this man gathering sticks prompted me to start this teaching. And it really came out of me thinking, yesterday before I started my teaching, for whatever reason, the statement, Shalom, Shalom, Jerusalem, peace be to you, when Messiah comes to take you home, may his praise be found in you. That fell upon me in my mind, and I thought, Shalom, Shalom, and I kept saying it. Shalom, Shalom, Jerusalem. What does that mean? It means peace be unto the people of God. That when Mashiach returns, that his praise would be found in you. Well, the Mashiach has to return. You realize that the Mashiach is not here right now. That we are still in a state of flesh and spirit. And so the Mashiach has to come. And Jerusalem, when he returns, it's our desire that peace be found in them. That their praise would be for the God of Israel. And because we are a Messianic Jewish synagogue, I think it's important to talk about the people of Israel. We talk a lot about what the theologies against the church are. We don't speak much about the lost sheep that are in exile today. And so we want to talk a little bit about it. But I want to read this story to you quick about this stick. It says the stick, and it comes from the gathering of sticks. The stick, it can also be said, is one who has reaped the rewards of leaving home. That's an exiled person. The tender shoot gained backbone and stature. It has learned to stand its ground. No longer is it swayed by every passing wind and breeze. Its spells out in the cold has toughened it, made it a force to be reckoned with. The malleable sprig has solidified into the most formidable staff. The Torah has two names for the tribes of Israel, Shevatim and Matot. A shevet is a branch or switch. Mateh means stick or staff. Both names express that the tribes of Israel are limbs of the tree of life, offshoots of the supreme source of all life and being. But each represents a different state in the Jew's relationship to its roots. The shevet bespeaks of a state of manifest connection to one source. The branch is still fastened to the tree, or at least still has its life juices coursing through its veins. The shevet is the Jew in a state of visible connection to his God, sustained by an open divine involvement in his life. The mateh is a shevet who has been uprooted from its tree. The mateh is the Jew in galut, in exile. A child banished from his father's table to wander the cold and alien trails of exile. Deprived of its supernal moorings, the Mate is compelled to develop its own resistance to the storms of life, to look to its own frail heart for the strength to hold its own, far from the ancestral forest. Every stick yearns to return to its tree, yearns for the day that it will once again be a fresh, vital branch, united with its siblings and nourished by its progenitor. When that day comes, it will bring with its hard-earned solidity the Mate maturity it gained sticking it out in the lone, rootless environment of Galut. This is an idea, a concept in Judaism that has lasted throughout thousands of years. You're going to see in the New Testament, the Brit Chadashah, that Yeshua speaks expressly about this, about being a vine and branches, and that we are the branches that are tied directly to that vine, and that the life juices of his kingdom run through us when we are connected. Imagine a tree in a storm. Last night, the trees were shaking violently with the wind. The trees were moving, and those branches were moving with the trees, but they would list whatever way the wind would blow. But they weren't alone. They were connected. They were solidified. They were strong. They were able to move with the passing of the wind, the storms that came their way. The sticks around the trees, however, on the ground, are tossed in the wind, are thrown about, forced to have their own strength, forced to live on their own. They're unable to survive the storm, per se, alone, unless they are fortified through something else. Embedded within this week's parashah, we read about this man that has broken the laws of the Shabbat by gathering sticks. As a result, was put to death and made an example. Following this event, God instructs the children of Israel regarding the command of tzitzit, and he gives them all a visual reminder of the command so that they will never forget and be forced to die. The sticks gathered by this unlawful man must represent something greater than just breaking of the commands. There has to be a greater meaning in that. It can't just be that he broke the command. Yesterday at work, we have a new attorney that works with us. It's a Jewish guy. He and I and one of my employees were in a room, and we were talking about God. And I was ribbing this Jewish dude because he's not very religious. You know, he was raised very religious, but he doesn't attend Shabbat, shul. And I said to him, and I speak Hebrew to him, and he doesn't get the Hebrew. And I said, "What's wrong with you? You're Jewish. What's the matter with you? You got to be connected to your roots, man." So I'm playing some Israeli music in the room, and he's laughing. He's like, "Man, I got to write these names down so I can get them." And we begin to talk about faith and life and the gray. Because to me, and to many rabbis, life is not black and white, it's very gray. Even the commands of God are gray. The one individual that was in the room with us, he's Christian. And he says everything's black and white. God's commands are very black and white. I said, "Oh, are they?" I said, "Well, how do you remember the Sabbath to keep it holy?" "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "How do you do it? Do you go to church?" "Well, I don't keep it as well as I should. I mean, we're all imperfect." I said, "Well, if we're all imperfect, then it can't be black and white." He said, "Well, no, they are black and white." I go, "You're right. God's commands are black and white. If you break the command, then this will happen. All right? Thou shalt. Thou shalt are very black and white. However, there is a significant portion of gray." So then the attorney jumps in, and he starts saying the same thing, and he's bringing in, we're kind of, two Jews against one Christian, and it kind of got kind of got bad. But what we said is that God tells us to keep the Shabbat, but He doesn't tell us how. Every Shabbat we come up here, and we say the Shemona Esrei, we say the different liturgical prayers, we say the Kaddish, we say, we sing different songs. Is that how we're to do it? Us gathering in this room together, is this right? Me standing up here and speaking to you right now, is that how you're remembering the Sabbath and making it holy? Is that really what God commanded us 4,000 years ago in the commandments? Did it really mean all of this? And we start talking about kashrut, and we start talking about this gentleman was raised in a very conservative home. His parents have a kosher kitchen. They also have a Passover kitchen. They have 3 sets of dishes. They have many fridges. You have to eat treif in the basement. You can't eat it in the normal area. So we're talking through it, and and many of it we're saying it's just tradition. I eat kosher. I told him, yeah, I eat kosher, but the other stuff's tradition. Again, very gray, right? And he said, well, I think some of it might be because, it's like all of us European Jews. We all have bad stomachs. You've heard of it a million times. It's a Jewish stomach. You have a Jewish stomach. You can't eat treif because it's bad for your stomach. I said, well, that's suggesting that man wrote the Torah and God didn't. Because what came first, the Jewish stomach or the command? Did God give the command and then consequently give you the Jewish stomach so that you didn't eat the food? Or did you have the Jewish stomach and then everybody say, we must not be eating this stuff. God must not want us to. So they wrote the command. Which one is it? It's the chicken or the egg. And so it's a debate. It's a gray area. I don't know. I wasn't there 4,000 years ago. I actually wasn't out in Har Sinai, so I don't understand exactly what God meant at that moment. But the point is that they're the commands, and how we interpret them for us today is very important. But at the same time, there is latitude that we don't understand. That's called grace. I can't comprehend the grace of God. And so these branches that swing in the wind, no need for the grace of God. They're connected directly to the life source. Why would these branches swinging in the wind need the grace of God? They don't. They're not in exile. They've not been cut off. But the question is are the branches, the mateh that are on the ground, the matot, are they going to experience the graces of God? At this point, grace doesn't matter to me with those that are connected to the tree. Those that are connected to the vine, grace is non-issue because they've already experienced the grace. It's the ones that are in exile that I question about. That shows you the true power of God. If God can forgive those that He's banished. And so, this guy gathers these sticks. He breaks the commandments. And there was no grace for him. He dies. So this has to have a deeper meaning, this teaching. For the purpose of this teaching, I want you to see that these sticks are the representation of the many children of Israel that are broken off from the root. These sticks that the man had gathered represent the Jew that has been broken off from the root, from the source of life, forced and banished to live in exile due to their failure to follow the commands of God. These matot do not represent those that are outside of the house of Israel. Only those that have been called, that have eaten from the life source of God, and that have been exiled due to their lack of love for God and for His commands. This is where in Christianity, there's an example where in Christianity the statement is often made that God sees only the saved and the lost. You've heard us even say that. God sees saved and lost. But as I think more and more on this, this statement suggests that there are individuals connected to the tree of life and individuals that have been broken off and forced into exile, where lost is synonymous with exile. Lost means that you've been exiled. Not everybody has been part of the tree. Lost means that you once had life, and then you lost it. You were connected to the source of life, and then exiled from it. So there are people that are on the tree, waving in the wind, and then there are those matot on the ground that have been cut off from the tree. The statement does not take into account all categories of individuals that could be. There's one more category to be aware of, which is those individuals that have yet to come into the tree of life, those that have not been grafted in yet. Thus, there are basically three categories of individuals that we study theologically. First, we care significantly about those connected to the source of all life. We call them Israel, feeding from the vine. Second, we attempt to steer free of those that have been broken off from the tree of life and living in exile. It's taught in Christianity, stay away from those that have been broken off from the tree. Well, who's been broken off? The Jew. Or the backslider. And finally, we seek to bring the good news to those that have birthed on a wild tree, to encourage them to be open to the grafting into the one true source of life. There are three types of people. Ones that are of the natural branch, ones that have been grafted in, and ones that are from a wild tree. The grafted in were originally from a wild tree. Taken from the wild tree, grafted into the natural branch to become a part of a different source of life. The wild olive tree has thorns and thistles and is not pure. But then there's the tree that God has made. And those tree that God has made was of the Jewish people. There are Jewish people that have been cut off from that tree, and they lay along the bottom as matot. And they're no longer shevatim. And so, today I'd like to discuss in short the exile, the matot. Not the ones from the wild trees that everyone goes out to try to find. Realize that's our focus in Christianity. It's the wild trees. In Christianity, pastors and preachers and ministers go out into the world's forest and they begin to pluck down and pull off the branches of wild trees. And they take those branches of wild trees and they attempt to plug them snugly into the life source, which is Yeshua. They attempt to make that grafting happen. The grafting doesn't always happen well. Sometimes it doesn't work. You put that branch on that tree and you think it's going to fix, and you mend it, and you pull a Mr. Miyagi, and then all of a sudden, you take the tape off, and the branch falls off still. It didn't cure right. The ones I'm talking about are natural to the tree. The exiled. They belong on the tree. To graft that back in would be simple because it's from the same root. It's from the same vine. For some reason, I feel like you guys are thinking, why are you speaking in parables? This is a big parable. It's a big parable, but it discusses the drama of today, what we're experiencing. The children of Israel, and the focus of the children of Israel has gone away. The focus of Israel has not gone away. The church today is embracing Israel. They're embracing the customs of Israel. They're embracing the traditions of Israel. But they're not embracing the people. The matot on the ground that need to be picked back up and put back on the branch. Nobody is doing this. Everyone wants to wear a kippah. Everyone wants to wear tzitzit. Everyone wants to keep kosher. Everyone wants to have Passover. Everyone in Christianity, blow the shofar. It feels good to the churches today. Oh, this feels so rooty. Man, I feel like I'm right in the roots here. Means nothing. It's the people that matter. Focus on the people, the lost, the exiled. When I say lost, I don't mean the ones that are in the wild branches. They're not lost. They're exactly where they were born. They're in their natural state. It's the Jew that is exiled that's in his lost state. Someone who never knew the God of Israel, living in sin, is normal. Totally normal. Why should we expect anything else? We shouldn't. The world around us, look how terrible the world is. That's what Christians say. Look how terrible the world is. You need to come back to your God. Well, that's not their God. It never was. It has to become their God. America, come back to your God. Is it America's God? It has to become their God. Israel, come back to your God. It is their God. Makes sense. I would say that. 100%. Come back to your God, Israel. Follow the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob. You say that to somebody that's not of Israel, they'll look at you like you're a nut. Follow the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Who's that? I have no care for that. I've heard of Jesus. I don't know who that is. It's all about how we perceive it. We, as a body, have to think about the people of Israel. That's who we are. My question today is can the exile return to the tree? Can those that have been exiled return? Many in Christianity say no. They've lost their chance. You've heard it. They have lost their chance. It has now been given to us to behold the scepter. The word exile can mean the following. It can mean expulsion from one's native land by authoritative decree. It can mean the fact or state of such expulsion to live in exile, a person banished from his or her native land. It can mean a prolonged separation from one's country or home, as by force of circumstance, like we see in wartime exile. And it can be anyone separated from his or her country or home voluntarily or by force of circumstances. The first definition states that some authority must expel you from your native land. In this case, God would be taking the natural born of the tree and exiling that natural born due to the failure to follow commands. That all makes sense. We all get that. The last definition brings a voluntary aspect to exile, suggesting that an individual can choose to leave its native land and live outside of the source of life. That also makes very much sense to us. I want to make the claim that no man is authoritatively exiled from the source of life without first voluntarily accepting the exile through choice of sin. God only exiles those that have voluntarily chose to be exiled. He will and has never authoritatively exiled any man from his source of life without that man first having chose to be cut off. So can those that choose to be cut off be brought back in? John 15. John chapter 15, verse 1. Yeshua is talking here. This is thousands of years ago. He says, I am the vine, the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. So imagine Yeshua as the vine, the source of all life. And the Father, God of Abraham, is pruning the source of all life. Every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. So he goes in. If he's got apples on the tree, he's plucking the apples from the tree. If it's got oranges, he's getting the oranges. If it's got mangoes, he's getting the mangoes. Pineapples, he's getting the pie. You get it. Why? So it can come back more fruitful. Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. The vine, the branch. The vine is the word. You realize that. Yeshua said, I am the true vine. He's saying, I am the word. The word brings life. Okay? So he's saying, I am the word. I am the word of life. And if you abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye except ye abide in me. He's saying, if you don't keep my commandments, the word, you will not bear fruit. If you don't keep my commandments, the word, you will just be a stick, a matot on the ground. And alone, without the source of life, you cannot bear fruit. He says, I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. What he's saying is, for without the word, without me, the word, you can do nothing. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch and is withered, and men gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. The exiled are these sticks, these branches that are cast off. Here we see that a man has to abide in the vine to bring forth the fruit. If a man that is of the vine chooses not to abide in the vine, then he is cast off as a stick, and he's gathered and he's thrown into the fire. But what does it take to continue to live from the source? It says, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ye shall ask what ye will, and it shall be done unto you. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit. So shall ye be my disciples. As the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. Continue ye in my love. If ye keep my commandments, that's the thrust of this entire parable. The vine is the command. Ye shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. The commands are the source of fruitfulness for all the branches that shoot from the vine. If the commands are broken, which is always a voluntary move on the part of the branch, that's important to note. When the commands are broken, the branch has voluntarily broken those commands. Then they are broken off and unable to bear fruit. Israel historically has done this throughout all time. Voluntarily broken the commands of God. And they've done that by the influences of the world around them. What that means is they have merged the natural with the wild. And I'm not talking about the wild branches being cut, merging with the natural and being grafted in. I'm talking about taking the natural branches and attempting to graft them in to the wild tree. That's the attempt that man does. Let's take the natural and graft it into the wild tree. We see this in 1 Kings. 1 Kings, there's a discussion of Jeroboam and Rehoboam. These are the kings of Israel and Judah, respectively. In regard to Israel's Jeroboam, Jeroboam's wife was seeking a prophet, Abijah, and was seeking this prophet to get answers regarding their son and the longevity of the kingdom. And the prophet had bad news for them. The prophet did not have good news. Because Jeroboam's failure to keep the commands of God, the Lord said that he will, in 1 Kings 14:15, the Lord shall smite Israel as a reed is shaken in the water, and he shall uproot Israel, root up out of this good land, which he gave to their fathers, and shall scatter them beyond the river, because they have made their groves, provoking the Lord to anger. And he shall give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, who did sin and who made Israel to sin. And the same is true of Judah, where it states in verse 25, it came to pass in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem, and he took away the treasures of the house of Israel, or the house of the Lord. And the treasures of the king's house, he even took away all. And he took away all the shields of gold which Solomon had made. And King Rehoboam made in their stead brazen shields, and committed them into the hands of the chief of the guard, which kept the door of the king's house. Ooh, that's awesome. Takes the gold shields and, we lost the gold ones, let's make brazen ones. I mean, how does that make you feel? Confident in your kingdom, I'm sure. But you see, in both instances, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, they were exiled of God, and their fruit purged and cast off from the tree. Sent into exile by their voluntary choosing to reject the commands of God and follow traditions of the nations around them that set up droves and worshipped other gods. That was the whole point. They attempted to graft themselves in to the wild trees. My question is simple. How easy is it for the exiled to return to their native land, to be brought back? After the Babylonian exile of the Jews from Jerusalem, Cyrus decreed that certain Jews can return to rebuild and reconstruct the temple that was destroyed. So there was an exile. There was an Assyrian exile and a Babylonian exile in 556. And here we see that they were brought out of that land to be exiled. And then Cyrus decrees, you can go back and rebuild, reconstruct. This was a physical return, but what about the spiritual return after the Father, after God cuts off a branch from the vine and casts it to be withered onto the ground? Does he forget about the withered branch? Does he forget about the matot? I hope not. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon. And his mother's name was Naamah, who was an Ammonitess. Solomon grafted himself into the wild tree of Ammon. And the fruit of that tree was Rehoboam. And God cast it off. Because of his attempt to merge with the wild, God cut it off. And he says, behold, there is a branch, a root out of Jesse that I will raise up. A pure branch. Because David and his house could not stay pure. God had to raise himself a pure branch. A branch whereby he could graft all matot, all wild, into and make them pure at once. We have to come into an understanding of our position. Who is in exile? Who is in the wild? Where do we merge ourselves with the wild? Are we like Jeroboam's wife running to Aviah, seeking the prophet of God, that we might hear of the goodness God will pour out on us? There are many in the faith today running and looking for the voice of the prophet, asking, Lord God, show us. Give us a sign of the goodness that we have in you. And if the prophets were here, it would not be good news, because we are merging ourselves with those that set up groves and worship idols. Romans chapter 11, 22 through 24, it says, behold, therefore, the goodness and the severity of God. The goodness and the severity of God. On them which fell severity, but toward thee goodness. If thou continue in his goodness, otherwise thou also shalt be cut off. Here he's talking to Gentiles, those that were grafted in. And they also, if they abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in. Telling us that here in Romans, Paul says, those that are matot, those that are exiled, can come back. For God is able to graft them in again. For if thou wert cut off of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? They have gone nowhere. But to the trunk of the tree they lie, for men to gather them up. And far be it from me to gather them up and throw them into the fire, but rather I will gather them up and attempt to graft them back in through the power and the Ruach of God. Mend the tree which is broken. Every branch that is cut from the root of the tree must at some point come to terms. A branch is synonymous with a man. Every branch that is cut from the root of the tree must at some point come to terms with whether it will return from its galut or remain in desolation. As the story stated from the beginning of the teaching today, every stick yearns to return to its tree. It yearns for the day that it will once again be a fresh, vital branch, united with its siblings, nourished by its progeny. When that day comes, it will bring with it its hard-earned solidity, the mate maturity it gained sticking it out alone in rootless environment of galut. The return from exile requires certain stages of restoration and reconstruction. Much like during the period that Cyrus sent certain Jews back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, so does the Jew that is in spiritual exile need a time of reconstruction and restoration when he or she returns to the commands of God and is reinstated to and regrafted to the natural tree of which he or she was born. Restoration is defined as the act of restoring, the state of being restored, a return of something to an original or unimpaired condition, restitution of something taken away or lost. What that means is that when a branch is cut off and it's regrafted into its natural tree, it is restored. Thus, it is restored back to its original condition. It is not restored to an impaired condition. There is no scar. There is no reflection of the past. It is only a part of the natural branch, and its sins are no longer remembered. There is nothing to show that it was once cut off. In Judaism, it is the worst thing in the world to tell a convert that they are in fact a convert. The Jew that reminds a convert of his conversion is exiled from the Jewish community, because it is considered a great and awesome thing that God, who did not call these people to be Jews, would call their hearts to be a part of this. They're not born of the natural tree, but yet their desire was to be of that natural tree. So there will never be a scar in the mending of that grafting in. The tape does not remain. Once the reconstruction and the restoration is complete, the tape is removed and the tree looks as though it has been one from the start of its birth. God desires that all his children are saved, and that all the matot that are cast off be regrafted into the natural tree. All the matot that are cast off, those that are of Israel, the Jewish people, be restored to its original condition. This enables God to keep his covenant perfectly that was made with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. When he casts off the people of Israel, he cannot keep his covenant. His covenantal promise to Abraham. So it is his desire that all Jew comes into the understanding and knowledge of the kingdom. Romans 11, 1 through 21. I say then, Paul tells, this is prior to the verses we just read. I say then, hath God cast away his people, the Jews? God forbid. For I am also an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God hath not cast away his people, which he foreknew. What ye not, what the scriptures say of Elias, how he maketh intercession to God against Israel, saying, Lord, they have killed thy prophets and digged down their altars, and I am left alone, and they seek my life. Well, what saith God to them? He says, I've reserved to myself 7,000 men who have not bowed their knee to the image of Baal. Even so, then, at this present time, also there is a remnant according to the election of grace. And if by grace, then is it no more of works, otherwise grace is no more grace. I started asking the question in the gray. How does grace apply? Does God have grace upon those that he has cut off? Israel hath not obtained that which he seeketh for, but the election hath obtained it, and the rest were blinded. According as it is written, God hath given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, ears that they should not hear unto this day. And David said, let their table be made a snare and a trap and a stumbling block and a recompense unto them. Let their eyes be darkened, that they may not see. Bow down their back always. And I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation is come into the Gentiles, for to provoke them to jealousy. Now if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? For I speak to you, Gentiles, inasmuch as I am in the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office, if by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are of my flesh. He's saying, I am going overboard with you so that my own people would be jealous. That's exactly what he just said. I'm going out of my way with the Gentiles. I'm going crazy, making all of you guys saved so that my own people will be provoked. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be? That's the mind-boggling concept that Paul's dealing with. Man, if the whole world is reconciled through them being cast away, imagine when God brings them in, when he has a mother brooding over his chicks, gathers them from the four winds. The life of the world must be so great, and he's pumped. Because it's life from the dead. For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, wert grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and fatness of the olive tree, boast not against the branches. Don't say, aha, na, boo-boo, you were cut off, and look at me now. But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. Thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Well, because of the unbelief they were broken off. And thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. People of God, the people of Israel, the Jewish people, have maybe cut off for a time. But God's desire is that we gather the branches and put our effort into regrafting them in to the natural branch. Reconstruction. Rebuilding a spirit, rebuilding the spirit of a man that has been exiled and cast away from his root for any period of time is difficult, because he or she may have been so fragmented by the wild world around them that it's difficult to purge his or her mind and spirit of the things he or she has experienced. Thus, piece together the fragments of the spirit to its original form is very difficult. It is not possible for man to reconstruct what once was pure and holy and good. But God can ensure that the natural branches that have been broken off from the root can be regrafted in so that the covenant is restored as it was intended. The covenant that God made has to be restored. The people and the children of Israel may be lost, but they are not forgotten. And the healer, the restorer of all life and goodness, will be bringing life back to the withered branches of Israel that have been slain by their voluntary unbelief in the source of life. We, both those of us that are a part of the natural branch and those of us that were wild and grafted in, must be the representation of all life and good to those that are seeking to return to the vine and out of Galut. It is God's desire that the exiled return, that Israel be restored. This is your obligation to pray for the restoration of our people Israel, so that our God can send our Mashiach to the earth, and we can, one in Mashiach, find the restoration that we have required in the Olam Haba. And when we say, Shalom, Shalom, Jerusalem, peace be to you, when Mashiach comes to take us home, we know that his praise is found in them. Amen? It is our duty to praise the Master of all, to ascribe greatness to the author of creation. For he made us unlike the nations of the lands and has not placed us like the families of the earth. He's not made our portion like theirs and our lot like their multitudes. We bend the knee and bow and acknowledge our thanks before the King over kings, the Holy One, blessed be he. He stretches out heaven, establishes the foundations of the earth, and the seat of his glory is in the heavens above. The presence of his power is in the most exalted heights. He's our God, there is none other. True is our King, there is nothing beside him. As it is written in his Torah, you shall know this day and take to your heart that the Lord is God in the heavens above, on the earth below, there is none other.
Amen, amen. Let's stand together.